Welcome everyone, my name's Dr. Caleb Owens and this is the first lesson in the Science and Statistics series. Today I'm going to be talking to you about professional integrity in science. And you've got the support documentation already which has these learning outcomes on there. I want to start by talking about civilizations and how members of a civilization need to understand what the foundations of the civilization are. Consider ancient Egypt, which was based along the Nile and the Nile Delta. Every person in that civilization, from the pharaoh down to the lowliest peasant, would know about the Nile flooding. They would know that the Nile needs to flood. They'd even be up to date on whether the inundation for a particular year was a good one or a bad one, because they were a member of the civilization. And the Nile flooding and releasing all the nutrients into the soil and allowing farmers to grow crops, that was the basis of the civilization. Similarly, the Mayan civilization, whoever you were in the Mayan civilization, you'd know about the maize crop. Whether it was a good maize crop that year or a bad one, the struggle, the successes and so on, because that food surplus was the foundation of the civilization. And finally, our modern civilization is based on science and technology. And you would hope that every person in our current civilization, based on science and technology, would understand science and technology and how science and technology works. But unfortunately, and particularly lately, you can see that that's just not the case at all. People do not understand technology much at all, let alone understand the mechanisms of science. Now, as you progress in your university's degree and as you take courses like this, you're going to become a bit of a superhero. Your superpowers will be critical thinking. You'll have more knowledge. You'll be aware of logical fallacies. I'm going to teach you quite a few. You're going to understand research design. With these superpowers, I want you to act responsibly, which means help those around you, help your communities, but don't be a dickhead. Let me give you an example. This is taken from a website, I think like 10 things to do around Byron Bay. And to be perfectly honest with you, I have no idea what's going on in this photo. It looks like this lovely lady's putting rocks on this guy's back. Okay, fine. I can't really judge this. And whenever you see something odd and you think, well, it's a bit pseudoscientific, that looks a bit silly, look, withhold judgment for a moment. Ask these questions. How much does it cost? Could it cause any harm? Have they stopped other treatment? So let's give these people the benefit of the doubt. It's $20, which is exceptionally good value if you get to have an interaction with a nice local of Byron Bay and get to catch up on the news. Is putting coloured stones on your back going to cause any harm? Probably not, as long as they're not heated, I suppose, as long as they're not burning him. I don't see any possible harm here. It seems like a nice friendly interaction. If the guy's got a slight back pain and the woman said, oh yeah, this might help a little bit with your back pain, then, great. Let it go, leave them alone. Yes, you're a powerful scientist. Yes, you know about research design and so on, but leave them alone. Just on that last point though, if this guy came up to the woman and said, yeah, I've got a malignant cancer, and she told him, well, stop your chemo. I can fix that for you with magical rocks. Yeah, suddenly we're in danger territory. So you'll have superpowers. You can interact with people in your community or even friends and family about their various beliefs, but always think of these questions. And if what they're doing isn't costing much and it's allowing some social interaction, then let it go. Here's an example of a great science educator, Bill Nye, attempting to communicate to people about climate change. Have a look at this video.
Here, I've got an experiment for you. Safety glasses on. By the end of this century, if emissions keep rising, the average temperature on Earth could go up another 4 to 8 degrees. What I'm saying is the planet's on fucking fire. There are a lot of things we could do to put it out. Are any of them free? No, of course not. Nothing's free, you idiots. Grow the fuck up. You're not children anymore. I didn't mind explaining photosynthesis to you when you were 12, but you're adults now, and this is an actual crisis. Got it? Safety glasses off, motherfuckers.
Okay, that's not a good example. That's not a good example. I introduced Bill Nye as a great science educator, but he's not doing much education there. He's obviously just incredibly frustrated. Don't be frustrated, because this is not the way to deal with situations like this that we see every day now, sadly. We don't grow up, you're not children anymore, and start swearing at them. I think the way forward in difficult situations like this is education. I'm attempting to educate you. But if you go back to your communities, friends, family, and so on, and you have your superpowers of critical thinking and understanding research, design, and science, then always think of educating them. Always think of explaining things rather than insulting them or confronting them, and so on. Many, many years ago, for a summer school project, a research report in fact, I ran a study which asked the participants whether or not they believed in the theory of evolution by natural selection. And also at some point in the research project, it asked them to explain how natural selection works. And of course, we got various people saying, yes, I believe in evolution, or no, I don't believe in evolution. And we got both poor and good explanations of natural selection. And I remember our marking rubric, it was pretty straightforward. We were just looking for something like variation in offspring. Some offspring are better adapted to the environment than others, and the ones that are better adapted, they survive and you get gradual changes. That would have been a good answer. But of course, we got a lot of poor answers saying, oh, look, it's all about mutation and incredibly coincidental mutations. They were poor answers. What was interesting, though, was when we looked at these two questions and how they overlapped, people who said that they didn't believe in evolution also didn't understand it. So this is why I always urge patience, because a lot of people who you apparently disagree with often don't understand what it is you're saying, or they don't understand what the scientific position is. I'll give you some more contemporary examples of lack of understanding. This is from Facebook by the look of it. I'm not anti-vax, but I understand why some parents do not want chemicals. I think instead of chemical shots, the doctor should give a small piece of the virus so the body can build natural immunity. And then someone's put down the bottom, so a vaccine. They've actually done quite a good job of describing what a vaccine is, so they clearly don't understand. It's this lack of understanding. There's something else in the context of the abortion debate. I'm not pro-life or pro-choice, I'm pro-education. Why don't we teach people about all those things and then let women decide? They're describing pro-choice. That's pro-choice dumbass is the response at the bottom. So always, don't do a Bill Nye and start swearing. Always be patient, always try to explain to people how things work, particularly in science, particularly in psychology. Give them a chance to understand. And then you might discover that whatever it is they're disagreeing with wasn't what anyone was saying. They were disagreeing with an incorrect representation of the argument. So these are important skills when you're dealing with people. And of course, it's also important to try and distinguish between people who clearly aren't interested in listening to you at all, in which case you're wasting your time, and people who are eager to learn. That's my photo of someone eager to learn there on the bottom right. If someone is eager to learn, help them out, explain things. One of the graduate qualities of the University of Sydney is that you have an integrated professional, ethical, and personal identity, which sounds a bit obscure, but all it means is that you've got to understand how your personal life interacts with your professional life and iron out any contradictions. Try to have integrity. Be whole, be undivided, don't be a mess of contradictions. If you're studying at university, for example, during the day, learning about the effectiveness of seatbelts, that's the example I've got there, how seatbelts save lives and so on, then you wouldn't, do your seatbelt research and then go home and hit the internet and hit your Facebook group in a bubble, a conspiracy bubble, and start talking about, oh yes, seatbelts hurt people and seatbelts kill people. It just wouldn't make any sense. So even if you're not going to be a professional psychologist, if you're going to join any profession as a result of your university studies, remember that that should have an impact on your personal life. You're not getting a degree to then empower yourself to do damage based on things that you were never taught in your degree. So keep this in mind. I want to talk about the absolute basics of science in this first lesson, the relationship between theories, researchers, and evidence. It's quite straightforward. I don't think this is particularly dramatic information. The researcher is interpreting evidence, the researcher is proposing a theory, and the evidence is either consistent with that theory or it's disproving the theory. Things can go wrong though. For example, sometimes the researcher might interpret the evidence incorrectly. But there is a mechanism in science that deals with that, and it's called peer review. You might have heard peer review in the COVID era, because we've been desperate for findings about vaccines and treatments and so on. And you often hear someone on the news saying, oh yes, we think this is working, but it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. What's peer review? Well, it's when other scientists working in a similar field look carefully at what you've done, what you've found, what your interpretations are. And your paper's not going to get published until you've addressed their questions, their queries, their concerns. That's what peer-reviewed research is. That's why if I've made a module or the library's made a module helping you look for things for your research report, we always say tick the peer-reviewed box. It's a very important cross-check to make sure that the evidence is being interpreted correctly. Something else that could go wrong, which is really quite dramatic, is when a researcher just ignores evidence and asserts their theory. And you might think, oh God, how could that possibly happen? It does happen in situations when people are, how shall we say, I've got a little crown there. They're self-important. They've won 2 Nobel Prizes and they think they're too good for their theories to be tested or disconfirmed by evidence. They're just going to make a claim. This actually happened for real many decades ago. A guy called Linus Pauling. He won 2 Nobel Prizes. Nothing to do with biology or vitamins though. One was for chemistry, the other one was for peace. So good on him, just a fabulous contributor to his field. But then he stepped out of his field and he he asserted a theory that vitamin C, the vitamin, it cures cancer. Also, it stops the common cold. This has never been supported by any study. Vitamin C has a mild effect on symptoms of colds, but common cold is a virus, and vitamin C doesn't do anything to the virus directly. It's just astonishing that, what are we talking now, maybe 40 years later, 50 years later, Linus Pauling is long gone. We rarely hear that vitamin C cures cancer anymore, and yet your grandmother, your mother even might have said, oh, looks like you're getting a cold, have some vitamin C, drink some orange juice, because of Linus Pauling. Wow. And even, Blackmore's reduce the severity and duration of common cold symptoms. People are still spruiking this idea that has never been shown to be true, but it was asserted by someone powerful. And when we get this in science, it's called argument from authority. It's a logical fallacy if the authority isn't valid. If Linus Pauling was making an assertion about chemistry, you know what? That might have some weight. We'd have to look carefully into that, because he did get a Nobel Prize in chemistry. But no, he was going on about vitamins. The research didn't support that. Because he was using his authority to push this idea, that's a logical fallacy, argument from authority. If you're interested in vitamins, just as an aside to this topic, You might be shocked to find that many of the vitamins you take don't do anything at all. And the Therapeutic Goods Administration used to be some obscure body, but we all know about it now thanks to COVID. And you might be surprised to learn that for many of the things that they look at, they're not assessing them for efficacy, whether they work or not. They're just trying to make sure that they don't hurt you. And vitamins fall into that category. If you take too many vitamins, though, you're in trouble. Studies are increasingly showing, not all of them, vitamin E, vitamin A, are the nasty ones for now, possibly others. But yeah, research is increasingly showing that vitamins can actually do terrible harm, or at least some vitamins. So be aware of that. Back to the logical fallacy argument from authority. The opinion of an authority is used as evidence to support an argument instead of evidence. Linus Pauling said that vitamin C does this, therefore it does that. Okay, that's not science. The opposite of that, though, is called ad hominem, where the person who proposed a scientific theory, we're going to attack them instead of the scientific theory. This used to happen to Darwin a lot, his Darwin being mocked in the early days. Even recently published research, Nieminen and Mustonen in 2014 looked at so-called creationist literature and found that, 2005, 2006, people were attacking Darwin. You can see there's something there about Darwin was a sadist, or Darwin was a racist, because no one else but Darwin was a racist in the 1800s, of course. Why aren't they talking about the theory of evolution by natural selection? Why are they attacking Darwin? Because they probably can't do the former, they have to do the latter, but that's an ad hominem. It's an ad hominem to attack a scientist. It's got nothing to do with the science. It's not going to produce anything in science. It's a logical error. So always think of this relationship. The researcher is interpreting evidence, they're proposing theories, they're then testing theories. And we're always looking to see whether the evidence is consistent with the theory or disproves the theory. The current understanding is supported by the latest evidence. And what I want to kind of get across to you now is how dynamic this is, that it's not just right, here's your theory, it's supported, end of story. No. The evidence is always changing. The studies are always being improved. And this so-called latest evidence is basically a mechanism where whatever your current understanding is, people are always analysing it, people are always criticising it, and people are always proposing alternatives. There's no respect in science given to the current understanding. There's no taboo in attacking the current understanding. And if anything, your role as a scientist, your role as a critical thinker, your role as a citizen in a modern scientific society is to question. Always question, always analyse, always try and come up with a better explanation. Always. You'll notice the asterisk there. You're looking for a better explanation. Your explanation is not necessarily perfect. It just has to be a bit better. And then if it does turn out to be better, you'll have a new theory proposed, and then that replaces the current understanding. And I didn't know how to do the fancy graphics, but you can imagine this coming out at you in 3D as a spiral, as the current understanding gets better and better and better. It's very dynamic. That's modern science. No taboo to attacking the current understanding. If anything, that's your job as a scientist. You're always trying to find a better explanation. If you win the competition and come up with something better, it's going to replace the current understanding. I'll give you an example. Stomach ulcers. This is in my lifetime. I grew up in the 1980s. A lot of people had stomach ulcers, and I can remember a friend of my mother's had stomach ulcers, and he was taking anti-stress medication and avoiding spicy foods because people in the 1980s and earlier thought that stomach ulcers were caused by stress or spicy foods or various other explanations. So they just had to calm down, and they noticed that when they calmed down, it wasn't so bad. In all the medical textbooks at the time was the tenet: Bacteria cannot live in the stomach. How can they possibly live in the stomach? It's so inhospitable. Why would you even bother looking for bacteria in the stomach? And because of that, there wasn't really a lot of progress. Then these two blokes came along, Barry and Robin from University of Western Australia and the Royal Perth Hospital. And they said, no, we think there's bacteria living in the stomach. Here's our bacteria. Now you can imagine the medical community was just very against this because it was in all the textbooks. But Barry, and I don't know who it was, Barry or Robin, one of them, or perhaps even both of them said, screw it, we'll prove it to you. They ingested the bacteria, self-experimentation, very courageous in science. They just drank a glass of the bacteria, got terrible, terrible ulcers, and then they used antibiotics to cure themselves. Wow! So that got them a Nobel Prize. Good on them. The Nobel Prize was awarded in 1995. And the new theory was proposed, which was stomach ulcers are caused by bacteria. So you can see that even parts of theories can be held up by things which haven't been properly tested. Always challenge things in science. Always have a go and try and pull it apart. This is how progress is made. Again, nothing holy, nothing special about the current understanding. You have to be very humble to be a scientist and realize no matter how good the current understanding seems to be, there's always something better. There's always a better explanation. Not necessarily perfect, but there's always a better explanation. So that's how it kind of works, the mechanism. Now, let me contrast that with pseudoscience, which is something we always need to be mindful of in psychology. In pseudoscience, you don't get this dynamic spiraling process which improves the current understanding, because rarely in pseudoscience is there analysis and criticism of the current theory. It's almost the opposite. You must respect what is understood about chi meridians in acupuncture. You must respect what is understood about vitamins and minerals in all kinds of fields. What? You're being told to respect it and not criticize it. And if you're in that kind of climate where analysis and criticism is forbidden, then no one's going to be proposing new theories. The current understanding won't ever change. So this is flat. There's no 3D spiral coming out here. This is flat. There's no progress. It's really, really tragic. And you can almost spot pseudoscience on this feature alone. If someone says to you, oh, this understanding has never changed in the last 3,000 years, they think that they're supporting whatever strange claim they're making. They're actually destroying it, because they're basically saying, whatever we think about this, we haven't changed our minds about it ever, because, we're a cult that forbids criticism. This is a logical fallacy, the thing I just described, where something's been around for a long time, therefore it must be true. It's called the appeal to antiquity. It's not evidence. It's a logical fallacy. Appeal to antiquity. Let me give you an example. This is a chart from Western Europe, maybe Central Europe, from the Middle Ages. And those points around the body that are being referred to are points where blood is to be taken. Leeches could be attached, or blood could actually be taken directly by just cutting a hole and letting blood out. This was so-called Western medicine in the Middle Ages. Very unscientific, very damaging. Even if you're not an American student, most people know George Washington, the first president of the United States. He fell ill, and so when someone fell ill because of this strange blood theory, blood was taken from him. He didn't get better, so they took more blood. He didn't get better, so they took more blood. This happened over the course of a single evening. They just kept taking blood, and unsurprisingly, he kept getting sicker and sicker until he died. The first president of the United States was killed because of this stupid theory that if someone's got a disease, you take blood out of them. Western medicine in the Middle Ages to, the early American colony. And you might think, wow, well, at least we don't do that anymore. This is Michael Phelps, one of the greatest swimming Olympic champions of all time. What the hell's he got on his shoulders? it's the same theory from the Middle Ages. It's not extracting the blood, it's just bringing the blood to the surface. But it's the same idea. That's called cupping. But it's the same unscientific nonsense that killed George Washington, his president, and he's using it in a swimming race in the Olympics. Otherwise, great guy, I have to say. But, ouch, what on earth is he doing there? We know how the circulatory system works now, and you want to keep as much blood in you as possible to keep things healthy, because that's how things work. And drawing it out is not going to make you better, unfortunately. So with pseudoscience, we don't see this procedure at all. Or if people are making claims and saying, oh yes, research is happening, there's no transparency. You've got to have transparency in science. You know, you've got to publish in open journals. You've got to explain to people what was done. Otherwise, why would you expect anyone to believe what you're claiming? And that contrasts with this mysterious hidden information of pseudoscience. Criticism is discouraged or forbidden. Evidence asserted by individuals. You might think that's an odd pattern, but I've discovered it by studying this over the years. A lot of pseudosciences, they don't come from a field or a large group of people or a consensus. They often just come from an individual or two, but usually not more than that. And they're just making stuff up like a cult leader. The other thing and this is what this entire lesson series taps into, is science is more about approaching understanding, being very humble. I'm just going to go for the next best explanation if I can, whereas pseudoscience offers certainty. That's part of its appeal. You know, I can tell you with certainty that this magic rock will heal your back pain, whereas your doctor will only be able to tell you with 80 or 90% certainty that that medication is going to help. Incredibly, people go for the made-up, unscientific certainty than the actual reality, which is things aren't absolutely certain. I want to give you an example now and contrast the science and the pseudoscience and bring in some psychology too, which I hope you'll find very interesting, using this idea of the body map. This idea that our bodies are represented in miniature somewhere else in our body. It's such an interesting idea. I've found it in at least two pseudosciences, but I think there's even a version with your ear, that your body's represented on your ear, but I'll just talk about these two. There's something called iridology, where on your eye you can see the body parts are represented. So if I had a dot in that part of my eye, then I'd perhaps have a thyroid issue. It's diagnostic. If I had a spot there, maybe I'd have liver problems. If I had a spot there, maybe there would be something wrong with my vagina. I'd be very worried about that. It's kind of odd, but you can see it's very thorough. The one on the right is reflexology. It's not diagnostic. It's to make yourself better. So if you've got a sore brain, you massage the tip. If you've got a sore colon, you massage that part of your foot. Sore stomach. See how everything's mapped onto here. Sore spleen, massage that bit. You'd end up with a nice foot massage. If you've got a sore foot, I can't find a spot there, but you get the idea. The whole, apologies to Ben Elton for that joke, that attempt at a joke. You can see the idea here. The whole body's represented on the foot or the eye. And going back to what I said just a moment ago, you might think, oh, the way these diagrams are drawn, this must be hundreds, thousands of years old. And sure enough, the Wikipedia page talks about, oh yes, people have been trying to work out what's wrong with them by looking at the eyes for hundreds of years and so on with the feet. But these actual maps and modern iridology and modern reflexology come from individuals. Bernard Jensen in the 1950s drew that iridology map. Eunice Ingham in the 1930s came up with modern reflexology. One person. Incredible. And how do we know it's a pseudoscience? Because how did they come up with this? Where's their list of experiments? Where are their notebooks of the experiments they did to prove that this is the way the body is mapped onto the feet or the eyes? Is this being constantly updated? No, because these are the same diagrams created in the 1930s and the 1950s. And if you wander around, I don't know, Byron Bay, I'm sure you'll see these same pictures. It's not like this is version 12 or, at the recent reflexology conference, we came up with version 14. It's not the case at all. So there's no constant review. I can't imagine any evidence being assessed, although Bernard Jensen, I think, was challenged in the late 70s and failed the test. I think he was given 140 patients and simply could not tell what was wrong with them. You'd think iridology should have ended then, but it didn't. And there's no humility about this. This is very clear, a clear body map. Very assertive. Someone's drawn this up all in one go. If Eunice had started by drawing 1 foot with vague areas, I think this is some part of the body thing. It's not that. Everything's drawn up in great detail. What's remarkable about body maps, though, is that while it is nonsensical that they're on your feet or your eye, they're true. They are true. But where is our body map? It's in the brain. And this is real. And there was transparency because this was slowly discovered through lots of experimentation, stimulating parts of different patients' brain, noticing what happens when different parts are damaged. We have this incredible representation. Now that little cross-section there is kind of this part of our brain here. In the middle, there's a somatosensory cortex and a motor cortex, but they're kind of traveling down the middle like that. And our body is represented along there. It's remarkable. And it kind of makes sense too when you work it out. Look how much is dedicated to the tongue and the massive amount dedicated to the hand, but the entire trunk of the body is like this tiny little bit. Which makes sense because when you think about connection with your brain, we reach out and touch things. Trunk of our body, we don't see ourselves rubbing our trunk of our body against something new. When we see something new, we want to touch it. It's just a remarkable discovery. That's a homunculus, if you're interested, this representation of what our somatosensory body map actually looks like. Big lips, big hands, that's the way we work. The thing about this, though, is if it's real, although it is being constantly reviewed and argued about and little things are switching places, but if it's real, it's useful. So how is it useful? Well, let me tell you about phantom limb pain. This occurs in, say, for example, I lose my right arm. Let's say I lose my whole right arm in an accident, in warfare, because I've got frostbite and I have to get it amputated. Some kind of tragedy, basically. I had my arm, now I've lost it. And yet, throughout the day, my hand is itchy. I've got an itchy hand. My right hand, that I don't have anymore, is itchy. You can't imagine what that's like. You want to scratch your hand, but you can't because it's not there anymore. That's phantom limb pain. And the hand could be hurting, not just itchy. It could be hurting, but you can't scratch the hand that is not there. Now, hundreds of years ago, this has been known about for a long time. Hundreds of years ago, if you survived losing a limb, what would you do? People would try and find their missing hand, dig it up, grind the bones down. More recent attempts would be to cut the stump higher and higher, cauterize it, try and destroy the nerves. It didn't help. It didn't help at all. And then this brilliant genius of a guy called V.S. Ramachandran, or I always call him Professor Ramachandran. Professor Ramachandran comes along and says, no, I think I know what's going on here. You see, when you lose your arm, you lose the connection with the part of your brain that's in charge of the shoulder, of the arm. You lose that bit. You lose the connection, but you don't lose the bit of the brain. And you scan someone's brain who's lost their arm, and that bit of the brain is not dead. It hasn't disappeared. that bit of the brain is still there. So Professor Ramachandran's idea was that I think it's just been remapped. The arm's it's no longer receiving any signals from the arm or the hand, so a lot of that's missing. So maybe we can find the signals somewhere else because of remapping. The brain is plastic. The brain recovers. Even if some people have terrible brain injuries, it's remarkable how quickly it's remarkable that people can recover. And I recommend you, this is in the reading list, I recommend you read his chapter 2 because it's just so beautifully written and such an intriguing story. But I'll spoil it a little and say that Professor Ramachandran found people's missing hands represented on their shoulders and on their cheeks. And he was able to therapeutically teach them how to scratch and touch their missing fingers, the missing parts of their hand. Just remarkable, absolutely remarkable. It does kind of go downhill a bit at the end, I think. He starts talking about, I don't know, you probably wouldn't have even noticed this, but see how the genitals are near the toes? Look, a brilliant scientist like Ramachandran gets to start talking about foot fetishes and things like that. Definitely read this chapter, it's fascinating. But even though that seems a bit flippant, no, I think there's an Israeli woman who lost a leg to a landmine, but every time she has an orgasm, she feels her toes once again. So it's just it's a remarkable idea. Body maps are real. They're not in your eye or your ear or under your foot. They're in your brain. Because it's science, because it's well understood, then you can actually help people with, you can imagine how serious and irritating that particular problem would be. So that's it for the science of psychology, but I am going to review it heavily in the workshop that's coming up. So I'm pretty sure we hit all those learning outcomes, and I hope you enjoyed the very first lesson.